Okay, Skyfall. Alright, I want to say something right off the bat when it comes down to the James Bond films. Uh, I'm not a big fan of the James Bond movies. I never have been. I like Sean Connery. I'm a big fan of Sean Connery. I like Pierce Brosnan. I think he's a decent actor. But as it comes down to the actual character of James Bond, I've never been a fan. He's a racist. He's a rapist. He's a disgusting human being. I never liked him in the books. Uh, Having said all that, this movie is another reason that solidifies why I think Sam Mendes is probably one of the best directors working in the medium, because this film is so much more than just a Bond film. Alright, I'll just work down a certain number of things that I did like about the movie. One, love the opening theme. Adele did a really good job. This is probably one of the better James Bond themes out there. It's not the greatest theme in the world, obviously, but at the same time, it does what it needs to do. The opening cinematic, the opening title sequence is actually really, really good. It probably is one of the better ones from all the openings. I mean, I don't know I can't name anything off the top of my head, and if I did, I would name off my favorite ones, but I obviously don't remember them. It's been a very long time since I've seen a majority of the James Bond films, and I grew up watching them. I grew up watching the Pierce Brosnan ones. And they were fun movies, and that's exactly what it was. It was just a little bit of a fun time. But as a movie in and of itself, if you look at it from an analytical point of view, it's not really that great of a film. James Bond as a character is incredibly flat. It's very superficial. That's not the way it is in this movie, and it handles the character in a very different way than any of the other films, including the other two Daniel Craig ones, which was Quantum of Solace and Casino Royale. Okay, one thing is, this is a Bond film, but it's also a satire of a Bond film, and also, this thing could stand alone. The only fact that it really makes it a Bond film is the fact that the character is James Bond. You could change that character name to anything, and this thing would have worked. Where primarily, alright, one thing is, it's a realistic movie. Even though there are obviously some sequences which are obviously heavily fictionalized, it's a James Bond movie, but it shows the real physical limitations James Bond has, considering the fact that he's been injured quite a bit. This is a business that causes you a lot of personal injury, mentally and physically. In the very beginning of the film, he's shot and people believe that he's dead in the very beginning of the film. I'm sorry for the spoilers. If you don't want to listen to necessarily the spoilers and whatnot, I'm not going to give away everything, obviously, but there's not too much involved with this. Alright, but the way it was written handles the character with a sort of respect that none of the other films had. It gives him a three-dimensional state of existence, where the majority of the rest of the films was Bond is sent on a crazy assignment. It's some convoluted, unbelievably weird, bizarre scheme of some type of world domination or some international terrorist organization just trying to fuck things up. And Bond, through numerous action sequences, saves the day. This is not how this film is handled. As a matter of fact, the action is incredibly downplayed. There are only maybe a handful of action sequences in the entire movie, and actually they probably maybe make up about 20 minutes of this entire film. And this movie is about 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So about 2 hours of the rest of this film is subterfuge. It's people using their skill set to try to track something else, and the twists are very interesting. It's intellectual, and it's not solved with just a gun. As a matter of fact, in the movie, James Bond's character, in the very beginning, he actually barely shoots anyone because he's such a horrible shot after so long. But building on that, by the end of the movie, when he's actually been back in the whole swing of things and whatnot, and had a time to really practice, he gets his groove back. But that doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to win. As a matter of fact, the odds keep building up against him. There are so many homages to old James Bond films, like with the exploding pens. There's a scene where you meet the new guy who plays Q. I love this guy. This guy is probably my favorite character in the whole movie. He's young, he's snide at points. He's unbelievably sarcastic when he's talking to Bond when they first meet. And he actually references the whole exploding pens deal with the other Daniel Craig Bond films. I'm like, and that's exactly the point. There are no really weird extreme gadgets in this movie. The only thing that Bond actually ends up using when it comes down to gadgets from Q is a fingerprint analysis version of his PP7 and a global positioning radio transmitter. These are the only things that he is given besides an earpiece. And that makes it a far more interesting movie because he doesn't have all these weird, convoluted gadgets that can get him out of any obscure type of situation, because that's a lot of what the old James Bond films did. They gave him the most bizarre gadgets that could get him out of any situation, so there was really no tension build-up. This one, Bond has to literally rely on his intellect and his wits in order to beat these guys. In the final fight scene, which reveals what exactly Skyfall is, and I'm not going to get into that because, watch the movie. But they lay out these booby traps because they are very underarmed. They only got a couple guns between a couple of these people trying to defend themselves against this horde of henchmen from the bad guy, who's played by Javier Bardem, and I'll get to his character in a sec. But all of the things that they do to booby trap the house are incredibly plausible. These things could actually exist. These things actually could really, work in the exact same way that it does in the film. The people who wrote this, even though two of them have written a majority of the old Bond films, going all the way back to the Pierce Brosnan ones, I don't even know if it goes further than that, but they did their research on exactly what logically would work in this film. And you can definitely tell that Sam Mendes really wanted to make it as an authentic spy film, but keep to the same feel of the Bond films as possible. Going to the direction of it, the acting was great, and it wasn't so over the top that, like, a lot of the Bond villains, especially the really early Bond villains, where they basically were cartoon caricatures, they treat the villain, they treat Javier Bardem's character in this movie with a great sense of respect. Of course, there's a lot of mugging in the very beginning, and you expect that. In the very beginning, when you see Javier Bardem, he has this really long intro when he goes to meet Daniel Craig's character, and you can tell that he's gnawing on the scenery as he goes along, but at the same time, you can tell it's intentional. Very much like the original ones, but the original ones were cartoonish to a point in which that, alright, seriously, what weird, unbelievably stupid way is this person going to die at the end of the movie? It's not the way that they handle the relationship between Bond and Bardem's character, Silver. And not only that, Silver has a realistic backstory. He has a clear-cut motive of why he's doing what he's doing. And it's from the very beginning of the movie, from when you understand that it's him causing what's happening in the film, you understand exactly why he's doing what he's doing. This is not one of those Bond films that has an overly convoluted plot that has involving some weird mega weapon, and it just, he's gonna freeze the earth, or it's gonna, whatever it's gonna fucking do. This is a very, very boiled down plot. It is actually probably the simplest plot I've seen in a Bond film. It's simply a revenge story. And it's a revenge story told from an emotional point of view. It's not just because someone got fucked over or whatnot. There's real emotion behind it. There's a real sense of sadness in Javier Bardem's character. Javier Bardem's character wants to kill M, Judi Dench's character in the movie, because He was originally a MI6 agent that got fucked over by M for the fact that she wanted to trade for other agents, so she kind of had to make that decision. And Judi Dench plays M perfectly because, and again, she's been doing it for so long now, but she plays M with a sense that she knows exactly what she's had to do, and she doesn't exactly have a clear conscience because of it. She understands the weight of what she does, and she has to calculate the collateral damage for all of her choices. And actually, that's probably one of the that's one of the major story plot points of this film is M coming to terms with the decisions she's made in the past. And at the same time, it's Bond coming to terms with the fact that he's getting older. His body is falling apart in many ways. He's scarred up. His knees really hurt him. He's unable to do the things that he's able to do. It's a realistic portrayal of this guy. It's not like when Sean Connery came back after that long period of time and he plays an aging version of Bond and whatnot. I didn't buy that. I never did. And actually, Sean Connery didn't even want to do the movie. He hated Bond as a character, and to be honest, actually, Bond as a character before this movie is a scumbag. I actually have besides the sex appeal, there's no real appeal with this guy besides the fact that he's a really good shot. And that's another thing that's downplayed a lot. Where a lot of the original films have these really elongated, ridiculous sex scenes that are involved with the Bond girls. There are actually 2 sex scenes in this entire movie, and they last probably for a grand total of maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Actually, probably even less than that. One of them probably actually lasts a grand total of maybe about 20 to 30 seconds. And it's just to establish the fact that Bond is still Bond. And that's the great part about it. It's not played for the typical Bond cliches, even though that they're in there. And there's one character, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of it because it's a really interesting arc that doesn't last very long. It's just someone that the fact that you would think it's a perfect setup for a cliche of the possible double agent Bond girl infatuation and all that stuff. No. It doesn't play it like that. It doesn't pander to the audience's intelligence. It's not a stupid action movie. There are plenty of action sequences in it, but at the same time, the action is downplayed. It's not the central focus of the movie. The central focus of the movie is Bond. It's the actual character. Throughout the entirety of this film, you actually develop the character far more than any of the other films has been done. And unlike every single other one of the Bond films, I actually cared about the characters in this one. The way that they're set up, the way that they interact with each other, and the way that they carry themselves. It's very authentic. I actually really wanted to understand where the story was going. I was looking forward to what was going to happen because it really was not clean cut. In a lot of the other Bond movies, are okay, there's going to be some weird invention that's going to go off and he's going to be able to save the day no matter what because it's Bond. This one, it has a sense of ambiguity to it. You're not exactly sure if it's going to end the way a typical Bond film is. It doesn't begin the way a typical Bond film begins. There are several times where people, they try to put, take risks with the Bond series, and they didn't take risks to the point at which that this movie did. One was the fact of the matter is that it doesn't have typical Bond cinematography, which I fucking love. I can't remember exactly which cinematographer worked on this movie, and it really sucks that I can't remember it, but the cinematography in this movie is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Sam Mendes has a great eye, and he also has a great eye for cinematographers to pick to help bring his vision to work. And from the very beginning of this movie, I could tell that this is I was going to give a completely different feel and attitude toward the Bond films that none of the other films were going to give me. And the funny thing is, 2 of the 3 writers of this screenplay, as I had said, have written probably, I think, about 5 of the Bond films, including the 2 Daniel Craig ones that came before this one. And so the thing is, though, there is a sense of continuity from the other films. You get an attitude from the other films that really seep into this one, so there is a sense of a continuous story from the previous two stories. But at the same time, that continuation really actually does stop before the beginning credits. And then afterwards, it's a completely different type of story. The plot is there only to service the character development. And that's what I love about a lot of different films. It's something that is there to really give you an in-depth look into what these characters are going through. And there's a lot of emotion behind it. And you see Bond really struggling with himself, not just with the people he's facing and, the powers that are holding him back and all that kind of stuff. He's really dealing with an existential crisis in his life. And it's not a midlife crisis to a point of typicalness. It really is, he is at a point in which that he's lost in his life. And there's a great scene where he meets up with M again after they believed he had been dead for about 3 months. And she asks him, "Where the hell have you been?" He says, "Enjoying death." And that one line speaks volumes about Bond's character at that point. The fact that he wanted to try a normal life. He wanted to see how well he could do at it. And for a time, he did enjoy himself. But when he was actually, before the scene where you see him kind of, living out his life, you can tell how disenfranchised he is with it. It's as if he can't function that way. He can't function like a normal person. Not what he's been through, not what he's trained as. And it makes me care for the character. Now, there were certain parts that Daniel Craig's performance came off as a little flat-faced, and I didn't know exactly entirely what he was going through for in each scene. But that was a very few and far between experience for me during the film. The casting was fantastic. Daniel Craig, Judi Dench, Javier Bardem, Ralph Fiennes is in it, Albert Finney is in it, a couple of other actors, I can't remember their names, but I've seen them in so many other things. One of the people who plays Posca in the HBO show Rome, he plays a psychiatrist in the movie, giving him a rapid response test. And even though he's only in that one scene, he owns the character in that scene. Sam Mendes really shows how good of a director he is, how well pieced together the movie is. The movie is incredibly well paced. This is probably going to be one of the longer Bond films out there. I'm not sure actually if another Bond film reaches this running time. But even though it reaches this running time, it doesn't matter. I was never bored in this movie. There were plenty of times in Bond films where I'm like, alright, let's move on. Let's get to the next scene. This sex scene is taking 15 goddamn minutes. I never felt that in this one. I was actually excited for the next scene of exactly how he was going to deal with it. And especially when it came down to the final fight scene. Just when you think that there was a possibility that, things were teetering toward the good part, teetering toward, Bond really succeeding and overcoming the odds and whatnot, more shit gets thrown in his face, and you really see how much he is limited as a person, especially when he doesn't have all the gadgets that he's used to. And there's plenty of homages to old Bond films, like the car that he drives, and obviously I said, with the exploding pens and whatnot to the original films. It satirizes the Bond universe in a way, and there is a part where he's driving M, and he threatens to eject her from the car. And she basically just go on, eject me, see if I care. And you can tell that Bond's respect for M is very much like someone who has grown up, who has a respect for a very strict and very calculating mother. That really is what she is to him in this movie. And you kind of understood that they kind of had that relationship in other films that, you're supposed to already believe this. This is the type of attitude that she has toward him. This movie, I actually believe it. I actually believe that he has real, genuine concern for her safety, her well-being. And even though, in the very beginning of the movie, that she actually causes Bond to get shot and almost die, you can tell that she did not take that choice lightly. And after the scene happens where she thinks that Bond is dead, you see that she internally is struggling with her personal feelings for him. And the only thing that happens is that it starts raining outside the window, and that's all that's needed to use to project her emotions onto the scene. And that shot probably lasts maybe only about 20-30 seconds. And that's all you needed. Sam Mendes uses a lot of the possibility, the principle of less is more in this film. There's not a lot of rapid cuts and a lot of really fast-paced cinematography. Actually, the majority of it is extremely smooth. The rule of thirds is obeyed to a T. It's amazing how well shot this movie is. And it's not something that you expect from a Bond film, actually, because the majority of the Bond films usually they're not actually known for their good cinematography. I will say the Daniel Craig Bond films has better cinematography than the rest of them. Off the top of my head, I'm not obviously going to go back through the 20-some-odd Bond films that are in existence right now because I don't want to, but at the same time, this cinematography doesn't treat the action sequences like the Bourne films. The Bourne films have their action sequences, the shaky camera, they're really quick cutting and all that kind of stuff, but it works for those films because that's the way originally it was set up. When they try to do that type of stuff for like Quantum of Solace, it didn't work. It was poor editing, poor camera work, and it just didn't flow really well. Casino Royale was not necessarily that much better, but at the same time it did adhere to a decent type of cinematography. This one blew me out of the water. There were certain shots, especially where I literally was just sitting gaping at the screen. I'm like, wow, that's a Kubrickian shot right there. Which is, I know, a cliche, because, Kubrick was not the only one to invent, the really smooth tracking shot, or the really smooth helicopter tracking shot, tracking a car through the wilderness, and that kind of stuff. It's been done by tons of other directors of other different types, of other different nationalities before, and I understand that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't work in this case. As a matter of fact, because of the cinematography is done in such a way that gives more space and more respect to what's going on in the scene, rather than trying to get as much of your adrenaline going as humanly possible, it works much better as an action film. There's actually this one action sequence which is taking place between Bond and an assassin in earlier parts of the film, and they're fighting on a really, really top level of a building in I think it was in Bangkok. And the entire fight scene is shot from one angle. And the entire fight scene lasts maybe a minute, maybe two. And it pushes in, and then it becomes really close and intense when the assassin is dangling over the the side of the building about to fall. And it's not like, and also he does die too. So, and he doesn't die with giving Bond any information, unlike so many other films where there's a huge amount of exposition given from, the one thug that happens to know all the information. When you really think about it, if an assassin is hired to shoot a target, he's not going to know all the goings-on of the operation. He's not going to know where the base is and all that kind of stuff. He's someone that was hired out. He was someone that was not a part of the actual syndicate that's involved in this conspiracy. And so one piece of the puzzle leads to another, which leads to another, and then it kind of starts falling into place. And even though probably in the first 45 minutes of the film don't lead, and they're not a process of finding out exactly what's been going on, like what's going to happen toward the main plot. It's Bond coming back and recuperating, and it's a fascinating thing to watch because, as I said, it's nothing but character development. It's conversations, it's intrigue. It treats this like more of a legitimate spy film than it does a Bond film. But And there's a lot of emotion that goes in between a lot of the characters. There's something at stake here. The original Bond films, especially the way that the other actors played Bond, you never got a sense that there was anything that they were going to lose besides their own lives. But considering how careless the Bond character has been, it's not like he really respects his life in a way. In this one, he does. He's actually scared to a degree. You can tell, especially when he gets uncomfortable around Javier Bardem's character in the very beginning, and when he first meets him, you can tell that he's not this cool, collected guy anymore. He's getting on in age. He's forgetting how to do certain things, especially since he's been out of the loop for so long. It treats him like a real person. It treats Javier Bardem's character like a real person, too, especially in this one scene where there's a reveal exactly what he had gone through. And it actually brought up some emotions in me. It gave me an emotional reaction, which is something that a film rarely does for me nowadays. But it kind of gets to the fact that there's a lot of symbolism in this movie, too, and it's usually involving modern espionage. How back in the day where a lot of the Bond films originated from, where it was like during the Cold War, there were nations fighting with each other, and then it kind of got to a point where it was terrorists and all that jazz. But Judi Dench has a really great monologue in the movie, basically about how terrorism is no longer between nations. No one flies a flag or whatnot anymore. It's fought in the shadows and all that kind of stuff. And the funny thing is, a lot of times when you have an introduction of Bond in a scene, he's usually completely shrouded in darkness. Or someone that he's trying to find is shrouded in darkness. Or he's kind of, the image of them is opaque, like you can't necessarily see. It's all about how, even though the bureaucrats, the people who are running the country say, this is an antiquated idea, it's no longer necessary, the characters in the film proves how wrong the people are, how basically this has become even more of a fight in the shadows than before. And it's just a really well put together film. Is it a perfect film? Not by any standard. Is it a good film? I definitely think so. It's probably actually the best Bond film out there. And that's mostly me saying that from a bias that I'm not a huge fan of the series. But as an action film series, it's definitely the one that has the best action. Not the most. The most action doesn't necessarily entitle to a point in which that it's the best action. The best action is involved because it's done with a purpose. It's not one random action sequence after another. The action is there because something sets it off. And it sets off after usually about 10 to 15 minutes of dialogue or intrigue or espionage and whatnot. It's people tracking one another. It's something involving it's something that involves actually real spies and whatnot. So, the one thing I have to recommend is go see Skyfall. It definitely is worth it's actually worth the price to go see it. Sam Mendes was pretty much the only reason I went and saw it, because he's such a favorite director of mine. And also the fact that they got a British guy to do the movie is awesome, because it's a British character. You can also tell, though, that especially after Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy came out from the Jean Le Carre book, that realistic spy movies is something that is really wanted. That's one of the reasons why I think the Bourne Legacy movie doesn't really work the way it is now, because it's still trying to recycle the same old idea from the previous 3 films. And even though obviously the Bond films has gotten away with this for the last couple decades, it doesn't necessarily mean that it makes it an effective film. It just means it's just the same shit regurgitated over and over again. It's no different than any other major series. To be honest, actually, it's not much different than the Final Destination series. It's the same plot told a little differently. Even though this does follow the same basic bone structure of a Bond film, where Bond is sent on a mission, he needs to defeat the bad guy, because of some major event that's going to happen if he doesn't. This does it to a degree in which that you care about the characters. It's not some overhyped mega super weapon that, you know, someone needs to destroy, or else, you know, the moon's going to explode, or something stupid like that, which was completely made fun of in the Austin Powers movies. This is a film that really does treat the audience with a sense of respect and a sense of intelligence, but at the same time giving them a Bond film that everyone comes to know and love, the people who actually are fans of the series. So, definitely go and see Skyfall. Skyfall is definitely a movie worth watching. If not, to be honest, in my personal opinion, the only film in the Bond series actually really worth your time. You really don't even need to watch any of the other Bond films to really get what the movie's about. It's a movie that actually would be, even if they're going to continue along, you know, with anything else, you know, it's a really good standalone piece. As a matter of fact, if this was the first James Bond film, that would be awesome. But obviously that's not the case. And to be honest, I will say I still get some joy out of the Sean Connery James Bond films, because it's Sean Connery, and watching him work a room like that is pretty fucking hilarious and pretty cool. He's a great actor, and he owns the character well, even if he is a scumbag in there. James Bond in this movie is not played like a scumbag. He's played arrogant. He has a sense of vanity to him. You definitely see his vanity come out in the final fight scene when his car is destroyed. You see he was like, oh, the fuck you just do that for? Yeah, it made me laugh extremely hard when I saw his face, and I was the only person in the theater doing this too. But at the same time, the in-jokes work. Everything in this film works to the degree that it needs to work. There's obviously probably parts that can be improved, but off the top of my head, I really can't think of anything. So definitely give Skyfall a watch. It's definitely worth your time.